Good day, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Safari Mack Explores Australia. I'm Safari Mack, your guide and host, helping you make connections to the wild. Well, ladies and gentlemen, here we are, still in the Australian Alps, hanging out with the platypus, or Ornithorhynchus anatinus. So today we're gonna finish up our time with the platypus, and then be sure to stay tuned for two special announcements by the end of today's episode. One is the reveal of next week's animal, as well as just a little heads up as to what will be coming next to Safari Mack. But before we begin, if you're new to my channel, hit that like and subscribe button. Check out my Facebook page for content on conservation. And finally, if you have a question about animals, or if there's an animal that you want me to do in the future, you just have to tell me by sending me an email, which you will always find the link to down in my description below. But if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's get back to it. Let's talk about the wild things. So, when you hear the word venom, I'm sure you know snakes and some insects, as well as other species of reptiles, right? Well, believe it or not, there are very few mammals. This is one of the only mammals, or few mammals at least, that are venomous. So only the males have this feature, because if the females had it, then let's just say that there will be a new phrase to a woman's sting. I'm just kidding. I'm just messing. Anywho, only the males have this special kind of spur that's on their hind feet, in which they use to inflict deep, an excruciating pain. It won't kill you, but people who have gotten stung by platypus venom can tell you that it feels like an extreme, excruciating pain. So, if you ever happen to see a platypus, watch out. Believe it or not, now the next thing is, when they're in the water or in dark, they are one of the very few mammals where they have a kind of ultraviolet light with ultraviolet light shining on them. Their fur actually glows. Now, here's one of the really big wild things that you gotta really take into consideration. Now, in terms of zoos and aquariums, in Australia, there's a few platypuses on display, but outside of Australia, they are rare. In fact, here's how rare. Currently, as of current, only the world-famous San Diego Zoo is known to have two platypuses that were transported from Australia to live in the United States. So far, they're the only ones, but they're not entirely the first. The Bronx Zoo originally had tried to obtain platypuses, and they did live for a little while, but they didn't last exactly long. Now, I can't remember exactly how long the platypus has been at the San Diego Zoo, but be sure to check it out for yourself whenever you can. For me, having been to the San Diego Zoo before, if I ever get the chance to go back, that's one of the very first exhibits I'm going to go look at. Now we're going to get into the problems and challenges that they're facing. Now, currently, the platypus, with some exceptions, like the state of South Australia, the platypus has not been in the worst conditions ever since the exploration of the Europeans. So what I mean by that is, since the Europeans came in, they've done somewhat okay. However, but that's not to say that there aren't some problems and challenges. Droughts have occurred, dams of rivers, and pollution has been a major problem for these animals. And so, as a result, when their habitat is gone, they really struggle to find areas to live, especially with how to deal with us, because we're using that water either for power or for agriculture, or we're just not entirely being the most careful with our water. In fact, some areas are just getting maybe a little too careless. And I'm not saying Australia, I'm just saying all over the world in general. So, unfortunately, this is all kind of a bit of a major problem. And so they're not in the most immediate danger, but because thankfully conservation measures have been taken, and we'll go into what they are. But pollution, netting, and trapping, that's all kind of been a major problem for the platypus. However, thankfully, of course, there is ways that we can still help them, and many different conservation measures are taking place. For one, we need Australia is trying to do better in terms of pollution control by constantly monitoring the waterways and rivers to see how much damage is being done and how much needs to be reduced. Well, basically, it all needs to be reduced, but how much we can be able to help these animals. Another way that we can help them, now I know that we have to grow our crops, we have our way of life to do, but there's a better way that we can learn to coexist by taking only what we need in order to survive and no more, but of course no less either. So, and we have to learn to adjust our ways if we're going, especially with like ongoing droughts and other situations. So like I said, constant monitoring of the water quality has been a great play in helping platypus conservation, as well as the conservation of all Australia's wildlife. And of course, as I keep on saying it, community outreach is a major step in helping these animals survive. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid that's all the time that I have for today's episode. And so now, here comes one of two announcements. I'm going to announce that fairly soon we're going to be ending our time in the land down under. And so, if anybody has any last minute animals that they would like me to cover in Australia, now is the time to do it before I decide to move on next in the world, probably by heading back to either Asia, or we could take a really wild chance and go all the way down to the continent of Antarctica. So just be sure to let me know now what animals that you want me to do in the future by sending me that email. Remember, it's down in my description below, and I'd be more than happy to look at some of the other animals that you want me to do for future episodes. But for right now, let's see what other Australian animals we can cover before we move on in the world. Second announcement, I'm sorry. Be sure to join me next week as we look into the life and time of the dingo. But until next week, this is Safari Mack, and I'll see you all out there.